Thank you. My name is Kirby Winters, and I'm with a firm called TechCXO, and I head up the information security practice. So I'm going to try to make this as interesting as possible without boring everybody, putting you to sleep. But I'm also not going to assume that I'm talking to a bunch of IT directors. I'm going to keep this kind of high level, help everybody kind of understand what information security means, what you can do to protect yourself, but what you can also do to be ready in the case that you are hacked. Because I can tell you right now, it's more than likely that something will happen to at least a good number of people in this room in the future. Coming out of this quick session, my goal is, hopefully, to elevate information security as a priority to you in your mind to some extent, give you some ideas of some opportunities and tools and processes and things that you can do to protect yourself better, but also to make it an ongoing thing that you work with your employees on and help educate them. But also help you feel a little bit better that there are things that you can do, and that even if you do get hacked, there are ways that in the best possible scenario, if you get hacked, you get ransomware, you have some kind of problem, that you can essentially thumb your nose at them and say, you know what, I've got all my pieces and parts protected and backed up. I can clean up what happened and start anew very quickly. So that's the ultimate goal, to give you some ideas around that whole methodology today. The place that I wanted to start is that I think one of the harder things for people to conceptualize is to pull information security out of the ownership of the IT director. The IT director is certainly someone that is a central part of that, but information security is important for the entire organization, and it needs to start at the top. It needs to start with the CEO all the way down and essentially educate out and set the priority within the organization that everybody needs to protect their information that they have about the company on their machines, on their phones, on their devices, and how they handle it in the organization. It really is there are critical losses across many enterprises. We'll talk about that a little bit more later, about who gets hacked and how they got hacked. And then also go through how it should be championed and managed and communicated throughout the organization. I think this is one of the biggest common misconceptions in my mind, and this may not be true for everyone. And I also wanted to say one other thing, that I really believe these concepts, some may not apply to your organizations, but almost all of these apply to enterprises all the way down to small businesses. So I'm going to focus, I believe, which I think makes sense, on small, medium-sized process and procedures. There are a lot of things that have been the domain mostly of enterprise organizations. As you can tell by Equifax and Yahoo, even they aren't doing a very good job. But some of these tools that are coming down are now coming down in price. You're getting these really nice things that will help you better understand, just like Trey does, of where they are and who is trying to do what into their network. But anyway, a common misconception is really that, you know what, my data is not credit card data. My data is not, some personal information of my clients. It's not that important, so I shouldn't be too worried. No one's going to want my data, right? But that's not true. It's important to you. And that's where the ransomware has come in, and they've estimated that over $5 billion have been paid out so far to ransomware. I mean, think about it. That's a huge industry. And that, to the people who are doing it, to the criminals who are doing it, is a big nugget to say, well, gosh, it's working for somebody. I'm going to keep doing it. So it's not going away. We're getting more and more tools that are helping to prevent it, but it's definitely not going away. So when someone is out there, mostly computers, and we'll go through how that works, trying to get into different networks, they're looking at it and saying, how much is this data worth to the person I'm trying to hack and get into, and what can I ransom it for? All data, just to this point, is available to someone, especially the owners. I spelled owners wrong. I'm sorry about that. So I want to set the stage and kind of give you an overview of how information security works, how hackers are getting into systems, and what that means to you. This is a big screen. I included this in the packet. I'm not going to go through it. It's just some terminology around when your CTO or IT director or manager of IT or your firm starts talking about things. It gives you a quick cheat sheet of saying, oh, I understand what these things are if you don't know about them already. But one of the most important things that I'll talk about later is this ability to report on things, which I think is really critical, and it goes back to what we talked about from Trey a minute ago. But to dive right into it, there are really numerous different ways that hackers try to get into your network. You'll notice that this is focused around software. So how many organizations here have some sort of either website or system or something in their organization that's going out to the world? I got a decent number of, so exactly. So to this point here on these vulnerabilities, and I like kind of putting it this way, that you may have a firewall, you may have encryption, you may have all these things in place, but one mistake by one programmer, may not even be within your organization, may be some vendor who's selling you software. One mistake can allow somebody to get into your system and start checking to see if there's anything of interest in your network. A good example is Kaspersky, I always have trouble saying that name, is a antivirus vendor, happens to be owned by a Russian organization, and they have been now blacklisted as a software by the State Department because they have so many holes in their software that they've allowed all sorts of different hackers into people that use their antivirus software. And it's been a really big black mark on them as a business because they've been pushing heavily into trying to get into the U.S. more. But we've actually attributed hackers as going in using Kaspersky and doing all sorts of mayhem. But all of these things are listed kind of as vulnerabilities, as people can come in through that web portal, something the external part into your systems. The other exploits tend to be things that you may have heard of, backdoors, which means some other way to get into your system or software that previously was not known or not protected against. Botnets are these systems around the world, and this is where I think that many people may still believe that there are individuals out there on a keyboard trying to hack into your computer, but that's not it at all. It is an automated machine that these computers that they've taken over are sitting all over the world and have software programs in them that are scanning every IP address that's open to the internet every day, all the time, looking for these exploits to get into that system. And I'll go through how that process works later, but it's not an individual per se. It is an organization of robots that are out there just doing it, and then it ultimately gets to an individual who looks at it and says, is this interesting, and should we go further? Other ways of getting into systems are malware. I think everybody's familiar with that. I'll go through a scenario of how that works later. And then ransomware is the ultimate result of someone getting access into your system, being able to encrypt important data, and then extorting you for money, which is, of course, one of the worst case scenarios. And then the people that are doing this is a good kind of overview of the overall actors and what they're doing. Cyber terrorism, we keep hearing that more and more. Being able to attribute some of these attacks and hacks by nation states, into Facebook and into some of the other, like the DNR, the Democratic National Congress, and all of these are really kind of scary that you're seeing these wars that are going on in the background of the internet all the time. You have others that they're extracting data, pulling reams of data from networks into other locations. We know that Chinese hackers have gotten into Lockheed, and we know that that a lot of the data records, not only for Equifax, but the Office of Personnel Management from our own government, that pretty much all of those personnel records have been pulled, extracted, and are somewhere living out in China for them to review at leisure. Really kind of scary stuff. And the other one that really would be pertinent to everyone in this room as well is social engineering. Social engineering is one of those things where someone would just call up and say, hey, this is John so-and-so from your company. I need to reset my password. Will you reset it and give it to me, please? And if they don't know that person well, or the help desk has not vetted them enough, they could just give them a password and let them go log into the system. That used to happen a lot, but more and more training and education are not allowing that kind of thing to happen. But it's still something that's prevalent, and that's where we get back to that education point. How do we start at the top and educate that importance of ensuring information security throughout the entire network? This is one that is usually pretty interesting, and I think from individuals in this room, this is probably one of the most dangerous possibilities out there. is something called phishing. I don't know, has everybody heard about phishing? Do we know what that is? The phishing is essentially sending to a person in the organization an unauthorized email from someone that looks like it's legitimate. So the most prevalent ones right now are ones from like Bank of America and your different banks, whichever ones they may be, or I'm seeing more and more, like I got one the other day from Dropbox. So essentially what they'll do is they'll send you an email, it looks like it's from Dropbox, it's formatted exactly like Dropbox, and it'll say, you need to reset your password, it's past its expiration, or some legitimate looking email, and it'll have a box on it where you'll click it to reset your password. So the one that I received said www.dropboxbusiness.net to go and reset my password. And I'm like, oh, delete that email. But that may look legitimate. And that's called domain spoofing. So what organizations are doing is they're going out, buying these domain names, and they're all the way current technology is set that we block it via IP address, not necessarily domain name. And we're blocking that IP address. Well, they've set that IP address to automatically rotate through IP addresses all the time, so that link stays open a lot longer than we would certainly like. People click on that, hit reset. When they type in their username and password, that site has collected that. Now they go in and log into Dropbox. All this is automated. Log into Dropbox and start extracting that data. And then they can use that data for extortion or any other type of nefarious means. The other thing that's really interesting, whoops, wrong button, is spear phishing and whale phishing. I like this whale phishing. When I heard this one last year, and it's been a great way of explaining that more and more of these organizations are going after the top-level employees of businesses of all sizes. So they'll find a domain name of a particular company. They'll go and research and try to find on LinkedIn or wherever it may be the email address of that CEO and CFO. And I had a few companies that actually fell victim to this, that they had the CFO found his email address, sent an email from the CFO to that CEO and said, hey, this is urgent request. I need you to wire $50,000 right now to this account. And he just stopped it, did it, sent the money out, and then he said, oh, did you get that wire? And the CFO was like, what wire?
We're the exact opposite. My CFO got an email from me requesting that to be done.
Wow.
Had
Yep.
my signature, my everything.
Yep. And
It's gone through our industry.
others have that as well?
Our purchasing or AP person got an email from my brother, and she said, I don't do that. Our accountant wires the money and just happened to copy my brother. And my brother's like, I didn't send that.
Those are very dangerous, and they're finally getting enough education around that where people are doing that, back checking. I hope it didn't cost anything. Yeah. That was their mistake, but unfortunately it was good.
How do they get the email address? If it's a valid email address that I own, how can they get that email address?
There are a variety of different ways. If you go to LinkedIn, a lot of people have their email address on their profile. Some websites have the email addresses of executives out there. Sometimes they just guess. Sometimes they'll just put the name at the start and put president at or name, first dot last name. But then there's also other ways of them just scrolling around the internet and trying to find it. So a lot of it is just hackers out there doing research.
They actually hijacked my email address, so it came from me legitimately.
So they hacked your email. Okay.
The first time. But apparently that got caught. So the second time, they recreated an email and they substituted a trolley house. They spelled it trolley house, but where the U was, they put a B. So they had created their own domain with that email and continued to. They were emailing back and forth with my controller the entire day trying to get it back. Wow. A legal bill is what it was.
Glad they caught it. So those are really dangerous things, and other times they can use that as ways to log into systems, to hijack data. There are a variety of different ways and reasons for this phishing to occur, but one of the things that we advocate a lot is there are a couple companies out there, and if anybody's interested, I'm happy to send some links to them, that do training so that they'll pretend that they're trying to phish someone. They'll send them a fake email and try to catch the employees of sending out proprietary data or giving them passwords or something or sending something along. And it's a way of training. And they'll then get an email back and say, yo, you passed, you didn't do anything for this, or oh, you failed, and it's a way of helping educate them by testing and trying. So it's a really neat service. One of the things that we like to say, and this is a little bit reiterating what I've already said, is that getting that organizational alignment, from top to bottom, making sure everybody is on board about information security being important. And what we call this at a high level is called governance, which is essentially saying, okay, if we have the right policies and procedures from the top down, from the CFO, from the CEO and CTO, on how all these things should be handled, how we should handle passwords, how we're passing data around, what type of verifications do we need for wire transfers or whatever it is, having this information in place does two things. One, it keeps everybody on the same page and shows them the importance of it. But two, it also gives you this foundation that whether you have audits that come in from clients or you're looking to get another investment in the business and somebody comes and asks for a security audit, this information then is in place, and you say, great, I have this. This is how I'm protecting the business. So this is something we'll talk a little bit more down the road, but it is something that is very important to keep in mind for the entire organization. So now I'm going to go into a little bit about current state of affairs, what's going on in the Internet and information security world, how people are protecting themselves, how people are failing at it. And then from there, we'll move into this is what I recommend, the kind of meat of it. This is what we recommend from our industry on how to help get better at information security. One of the sobering statistics is virtually all organizations have either been hacked or will be hacked. So think about that. Think about if everyone in the room here were hacked in some way at some point. What does that mean? It means everybody's vulnerable. It means everybody should be doing more for information security. We certainly don't expect people just to throw up their hands and say, I'm going to get hacked. I'm just not going to worry about it, because ultimately it can be catastrophic. If your data that you use to run the business, whether it's your QuickBooks or it's your inventory management system or anything, gets just completely derailed, how much money are you going to lose daily by having those systems offline? That's one of the big risks that you're trying to evaluate. Having those policies and procedures in place can help. But some of the tools that we're going to talk about a little bit more, but we can certainly go into more detail later if you'd like some information on it, is having some intrusion detection systems in place, being able to see what different people are trying to do, different bots are trying to do to hack your networks. And this reporting and management system, this is something that's really cool that's come down from the enterprise side. It's starting to become very reasonable, and it's something that gives you a visibility into your entire network of what's going on and what is important to you. So meaning you take this kind of system, it can be in the cloud, it can be in your network, you would attach it to the logs of your firewalls and your servers and your computers and your antivirus system. It consolidates it into one place for your IT director or your outsourced IT organization or whoever it may be. And then they can see in real time what's going on and have a better chance of protecting you against a hack when or hopefully if it occurs.
Question on, so a lot of us are now using hosted systems
Mm-hmm.
where our data is, it's a monthly subscription type
Right.
model, and they're hosting that in the cloud somewhere. So we're not really in charge of the protection of that data. Where are we? I mean, where's the handoff?
The real answer is you are in charge of that data. I'll give you later on. I was going to talk about it, but I'll talk about it now. That one of my clients had a similar problem where they said, "Oh, okay, well, we just got an audit request from one of our biggest clients, and all of our systems are housed at Amazon. So, it's protected at Amazon because they manage that. So we just need to take a look at our procedures and whatnot." So when we start digging in to what they were doing, they had set up generic servers in Amazon, but they weren't storing their personal information. They held personal information of their clients' employees. So they weren't encrypting their data. They weren't in compliance with holding on to any it's called PII, personally identifiable data. And their servers were sitting out there just standard setup, which means the firewall was at its basic state. They weren't collecting any reporting. and they had not set up the perimeter firewall in the Amazon cloud to ensure that they were protected, nor did they have any other direct connection between Amazon and their local network while they were transferring some of this critical PII data. So all of this was very dangerous on one side, and also not in compliance for their agreement that they had with their clients. So you can't assume that Amazon, it's in Amazon, they're protecting it, because they're not. If you go and read your service agreement with any cloud hosting provider, 99% of them, unless you're paying for security as a service with them, they will state explicitly that you are responsible for the security of your system. So it's not something that you can assume that just because it's at Azure or Amazon or another hosting provider that they're doing it unless you specifically signed up for that service.
Well, I'll take it a step further. So it's not necessarily hosting, but it's the actual software that's hosted by the software vendor. Mm-hmm. And we're using that system.
Gotcha.
Right? You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
So then where is the handle? Because I have no authority to do any kind of more stuff. I'm just logging into their website to use it and creating data management. I'm questioning what documentation should I be asking for to make sure that they're encrypted.
So, very good. Let's reverse the situation that I just was describing. That this other client had their information hosted in the cloud by this company, and they were just logging into their website and managing their service. They came to that client and said, I need to see your security documentation. Show me your certifications or any of your procedures that you're doing to protect my data. So that should be a documentation that you request and have on file as just a business continuity side and an audit perspective from your vendors if they're managing critical data of yours in the cloud. Usually that is called I'll get into that a little bit later, but it's called a SOC 2 documentation. It's the service organizational controls of that particular system that goes through top to bottom how they're protecting your data. So if you go to Amazon and you say, hey, I need your SOC 2, they'll give you one. And it shows that we handle people coming in and out of our facilities and we handle the general networking, but it stops short of saying we don't protect your systems per se. You have to put those controls in, but this is how we handle the global piece of it. When you get that from a vendor who's a software as a service provider, it'll go all the way down to how they handle account control and how they protect the data within their systems. So that's what you probably asked for.
Are there any, by law, are there any requirements for a provider like that for minimum security issues, particularly if they're dealing with PCI kind of compliance stuff, that as an operator or a customer of those, they should be allowed to expect?
It depends on what data that they store, but absolutely. PCI is designed around the credit card industry. They have extremely specific information on how credit card data should be managed from the point that you pick up the card all the way to where it gets authorized. And in the past, people have been kind of loosey-goosey with that, but you should never be, your vendors or anybody should not be storing that credit card data anywhere on their system. It should pass through an encrypted tunnel into the gateway provider who authorizes it and sending it back. But to answer your question, Randy, there's a lot of different industry and governmental compliance requirements around those different types of data. PII is another one, even birth date, social security number, address, phone number, email, all of those fall under PII, and there are regulations and certifications that you need to have when you collect that data and manage it for your clients, or they manage it for you. Just a quick little note of headlines here to kind of give you a state of affairs and how things are going at this time. Cybercrime damages. I mean, $6 trillion annually. I mean, it's crazy how much cybercrime is occurring right now, and it's only accelerating. Cybersecurity spending is going up on the same type of trajectory, which makes sense. But now we're adding more and more devices to the internet. Internet of Things devices. I suspect that vending machines and other type of devices are now connected to the internet and reporting back on their inventory. Well, they're doing a lot of different things. Is that data important? Could that machine be taken over and used for some other purpose? All these things at some point are continue to be looked at from a lot of different angles. And then we see a lot of it happening too from the United States government, as well as how it's affecting productivity. So all of these have big cause and effects. Just a couple of small companies that have had breaches or been affected by cybercrime and cyber incidences in the past 12 months. We see, of course, these two. We see a lot in the news. So Equifax and Target. Target was a while ago, but Target lost their CEO because of a very simple event that he had no control over. In the testimony to Congress, the Equifax CEO testified that they had attributed it to a single individual in the technology organization that had allowed the breach and had not done a good job of checking back on that issue and reporting on it that allowed all of those records to be lost. And that he thought the CIO and CTO and CIO had it covered, and each one of them thought that the other one had it covered. So there was a lot of finger pointing. But ultimately, to think about that, the CEO lost his job because of something theoretically beyond his control down lower in the organization by not steeping from top to bottom enough the importance of information security and quickly reporting potential issues. This just gives you an idea of what kind of issues are on the rise and things that you'll be thinking about. The application vulnerability is still high on the list that we talked about earlier, those bots going around looking for ways to get into your networks. Malware is another, insidious one, that one where you get emails and they're trying to get into your system. If you click on the wrong link and maybe download the wrong file, they can get right into your system and start taking over services. And all these others you can kind of see. Mobile devices is creeping up more and more. We think that our phones are impregnable to these events, these security events, but more and more they're finding ways. There was an iOS issue that came up and was patched quickly last year. Android has had more and more issues and been able to stay ahead of it for now. But it's something where we need to think about, because your mobile devices, email addresses or email accounts, and more applications are being used on mobile phones by your employees that have access to your systems. They could also be vulnerable. One thing I also wanted to point out is that this one has been on the rise for a number of years, internal employees. That, again, having people think about information security and making sure that things are being handled well, sometimes disgruntled employees, or sometimes just carelessness can cause some major breaches, and that's exactly what happened to Equifax. I thought this was an interesting chart I would share with everyone as well. Each year, some reports are published on the actual cost. What's the value of information that comes out of your systems or being handled in a security breach. The ones we hear a lot about. Ones we hear a lot about are Social Security number. $30 makes sense. We have health records, $20. But then you start looking at bank account numbers. $300. This one is a big one. Ransomware. More and more. This one keeps going up every year. That they keep forcing people to pay more and more money if they haven't fully backed up their information and that are susceptible to a ransomware. And then that's why that $5 billion is going to keep going up in what ransomware organizations are collecting, because people are not protecting themselves well enough to not have to worry about a ransomware. So I thought this may be interesting. Kind of describe a little bit how a breach occurs and why it's so important to be ready and protected and know how to respond to it. These bots are out in the world, all over the world. Doesn't matter. There's no borders out on the internet. So it could be in Africa, or it could be in South America, or it could be down the street. Some computer has been compromised. For the longest time, Windows XP was one of the biggest contributors to these botnets as they're going around the world, because Microsoft stopped supporting XP a number of years ago. I think it's 6 years or more ago now. And they haven't been doing updates to it, yet still a large number of people around the world are still using XP. They were convinced after a while, because of so many viruses and so many holes and so many ways to compromise those machines have been made available and made prevalent, that they released a few additional software patches to them just to try to protect the rest of the world from those computers that had become compromised. So what ends up happening is those machines are all out there doing stuff and trying to find a hole. And then one of these botnets actually would get in to the systems through some sort of way of compromise, whether it's one of those malwares or a software hole or any number of things. Software hole is SQL injection, as one example of that. Then they have these tools that go into your system. So they just automate it all, right? They go into the system and just immediately map out everything that they can find. A great example of that was a Target breach, that bot found a simple account for an HVAC vendor for Target. They'd created a username and password for him, and the password was password. That bot got into the network, and because their network wasn't segmented well, or at all, this bot was able to go through their entire network and start monitoring traffic and looking at systems. It has tools that do that. They've taken common networking tools that are essentially called sniffers that go through and can monitor network traffic. They've adjusted those tools so that they're able to go in and check out everything that happens on the network, categorize the data and where it's going to and from, do a discovery of the computers out there and start looking at those and see if there's anything of interest. In the Target breach, it found their credit card processing system, realized that the data was being transmitted unencrypted across the network, and put in a tool just to start sniffing that data out. So once they identify something of interest, they use a capture tool, which is exactly what happened at Target, and they start immediately pulling out information. It gets encrypted by them. They encrypted it at least, right, on the way out. Put it in little wrappered zip files and start sending it out to servers on the network. And then the actual hacker groups, the criminal groups, start pulling that down and figuring out how to use it. Most of this is automated now. It is unbelievable. And that's why we have to use similar tools to protect against it daily, because we're not going to be able to sit there and see onesie-twosies. It's happening all the time. Any questions about how that works?
I just want to know how they can automate that and make that work, and my system can't tell me when my vending machine is going to be out of power.
I can't answer that. Sorry.
I know you didn't say ticketing software.
No, I didn't say ticketing software, but can't my software tell me when I'm going to be out?
So this is just a quick, interesting slide to show that when there are really three stages, if you can see this, of what happens when somebody gets into your network. There's when they first get into the network. Then there's that discovery phase that we discussed earlier, we showed earlier, when they're going in and checking out your network. And then when they actually start pulling things out. If you look at it, these big dots show when the vast majority of these intrusions are identified. And you notice that there's a pretty good bit that are identified at the start of the compromise, but most of them are in this area here, either days, weeks, or months. Unfortunately, a pretty large amount, 5%, not at all. So, you think about the Equifax hack, 134 million records, that didn't happen overnight. That was months and months and months that they never even knew it was there, and just siphoning data off. So this is kind of one of those scary things where you need to always be vigilant. I'm not trying to scare you here, other than to say that this is not a one-time thing. It's something that you need to do religiously, become part of your standard business operations. So the kind of next step in that is, okay, well, I'm telling you that there are all these things that you should be doing, that we need to invest in it and having it be part of your business. I wanted to kind of describe a little bit Why should we be doing this? What's the point? Is it really going to help me out? And I think there are a couple good reasons for that. To Randy's point earlier, regulatory is a key part of that. Depending on where you or your vendors fall in some of these regulatory environments, it's not only regulation, but it's of course the importance of that data to you. But these become great foundational frameworks of, well, this is what you need to do for a credit card. Let's use some of those pieces and parts to help protect my data as well, because somebody spent a lot of money to make sure that they're protecting this information. A lot of these, too, are government oversights when you start looking at finance and SEC. But just starting off with the PCI and understanding how some of those controls are managed is a great way to say, we don't store credit card data, but we essentially adhere to the PCI standards to make sure that we're protecting our infrastructure is a great selling point. Having this supply chain framework, environment, and compliance, that it's not just what's going on with the credit card providers, but it's from start to finish. So when someone submits something into your network for an order, it comes out the other side and goes into a credit card system. All that in between is a potential for being hacked or potentially being compromised. So the more that you have the benefit of saying we have control of our system and we're monitoring our vendors is another way of saying we're doing good business. And that's a great selling point to your clients, to your investors, to whomever it may be. And these information security audits, it goes back to what I'd mentioned before, where a client of mine was audited by their biggest customer. Well, now you can take that and go to your clients that are your vendors that you're using in the cloud. But being able to do that and have it ready instead of having to scramble around and doing something for that is a big benefit. I like talking about these audits, that doing these over the long term and making it a part of your business, it's just a report that you can say, here's what we're doing on a monthly, daily, yearly basis for maintaining our information security. So, if you go and hire a new employee and you say, hey, do you do good work? He says, I did great work yesterday. Okay. Did you do great work the day before? Well, not really. The day before I did okay work. All right. Well, how about a month ago? No, I did terrible work a month ago. I mean, you're probably not going to hire that employee if they're not consistent. But what ends up happening with these audits a lot of time is they'll come out and give you a point in time and say, here's what we did last month, or here's what we did last month, last week, whatever, on our information security. Well, did you do this for the last 12 months? Well, no. Then if you haven't given them some information on these audits, that they've done it over a period of time, over the last 6, 12, 18 months, whatever it may be, then you know that they haven't been consistent about their attention to information security. So that's why we try to really say this is something that should be done over time, because it then proves to your investors, to your customers, to your management that yes, we're staying cognizant and smart with our information security. And this becomes a selling position. This becomes a great way to put it in front of your clients. We're dedicated to security. Here's just a little blurb in our sales collateral that we have strict security controls around our systems. Makes them feel better about opening up the ability for them to share information with you. And then risk management becomes something up at the management level where I'll talk a little bit more about risk in a bit, but risk is a very key critical thing for management. You've got business continuity. Like how important is it for you to maintain your ability to do business every day? Very important, right? But you can also quantify that and say, here's what we're doing to maintain or to limit our risk and to maintain our business operations as best as possible. All right. That was kind of here's state of where we are in the information security world. Here are the hazards. So I'm going to go into what we can do. First and foremost, it's like I keep harping on throughout this whole time, is that strong governance and employee education is a foundation of this, making sure everybody understands what you're trying to do and why you're trying to accomplish it. Ensuring that you have good identity and access management controls. I mean, I know it's not always a priority when you're running and working really hard with all of your organization, but making sure that you have a common environment when someone logs into the system, that it permeates throughout the whole organization. Most of the time, Active Directory is the simplest way of installing that. There are other single sign-on systems to do it, but you don't always realize the benefit of that is that if you have a disgruntled employee and you let them go, I think everybody's had that happen, I know I have, you want to be able to turn their account off immediately or even before you fire them. Because if they go in and start deleting things or removing things, I mean, that's still cyber fraud. That's still them going in and willful destruction of company property, and they can wreak some havoc if you don't have good enough controls around your systems. Mobile and cloud security is becoming bigger and bigger. Like I mentioned before, that these devices now are connected to your network, and that can be an entry point of causing major problems. And you need to harden your network security. That's where you take, and like I mentioned before, on Amazon or other areas, even just around your office, ensure that you have the good firewalls in place and you're monitoring what's going on with your systems. And that scanning and reporting is going to help tell you that, why am I getting access into this system from external sources that I shouldn't be getting? I've got stories of clients where they're like, I'm getting server access from China, and I don't have any clients in China. What's going on here? That's one of those really scary moments when you have to start digging deep and trying to figure out what's going on. I'll leave that client nameless when we're going to talk about them. But this is also another intriguing question I get a lot. How much should I be spending on information security? I mean, what I'm talking about sounds expensive, right? There are ways to do things that are more reasonably priced these days. You're getting more and more cloud providers. But in general, large organizations spend about 11% on their IT budgets. Smaller businesses, small to medium businesses, about, let's say, 15%. And of that, you generally end up spending about, I'm on a different slide. Oh, well, let's see. So that's what they're spending, this is what they're spending on their IT budget. And I think I have it on a different slide, but small businesses really should be spending about 7 to 10% of their IT budgets on security. So you can kind of do the math there, that when you are looking at how to fine-tune your budgets on what you should be spending, if you stay in that 7 to 10% range of your overall IT budget on security software and services, then that's kind of what you should be thinking about where it should go. I don't know how many people are probably spending that much at this point. Maybe not sound like a lot, but when you start fine-tuning it out, you can say, okay, so now I have some of my budget to use for these different tools that we're talking about using. The other kind of focus here is what kind of risk does this really overcome? What am I trying to do here with my information security? Well, I'm trying to limit my risk. So one of the best scenarios is that you never get hacked. That's of course the best scenario. The second best scenario is that you get hacked or get ransomware, and you patch the issue, you roll back from your prepared disaster recovery backup that you've already done with your information security backup plan, and then you keep moving and with virtually no disruption. That is planning for the future. That's putting the controls and information security pieces in place, connecting that with your disaster recovery plan, and making sure that you're protected in the case of a major issue. Some of those areas that you'd end up investing in would be some of those systems and software that I'd mentioned before, the reporting software, the intrusion detection software, and some assessments and review. Certainly putting that procedures and processes in place to make sure that passwords are better than just simple passwords. that you have a common security system for all of your systems and networks, that you're able to tell when, who's accessing what at what time and turn somebody off at a global level as an employee leaves. And then also something I'll talk about briefly in a little bit is cybersecurity insurance. Cybersecurity insurance. How many people have cybersecurity insurance? Has anybody been looking into that yet? Just a few. Cybersecurity insurance has become more and more prevalent over time. It's still in its early stage, but it is something that most major insurance companies now are offering. But one of the things that's important to know about that is that there are a lot of exclusions around the insurance as well, that if you're not doing the minimum effort of trying to protect yourself, then you're running into the position of not being able to receive a claim on an issue that you have because you weren't doing at least the minimum ability to try to protect against that. Some of the other things that are excluded are damage to reputation, potentially loss of sales, or theft of intellectual property. Somebody comes in and steals your software, or somebody knocks your sales system out for a week and you've lost that amount of sales. Cybersecurity insurance is most likely not going to pay on that. So I highly recommend looking into that. Sometimes they're somewhat reasonable, but you also need to read closely what is covered. You may be paying for something that may not help you. The kind of next step in this is that more than anything else, that it helps to know, right, what you should be doing. And one way of doing that is having an assessment by either your, let's say you have an outsourced IT firm. I'm sure they could do an assessment. There are a number of firms all over the country that can come in and say, let me look at your network, let me look at what you're doing, provide with you a standard list of best practices, then go and look at where you're in need of remediation, where you're not quite meeting that minimum level, and then look at ways you can take some of that budget and invest in it over time. The way our firm does it is we come in and we look at your security controls. We come back with an analysis. We say, okay, let's first look at if you do adhere to any industry certifications and requirements, and then return a report. So a report should have a variety of different things. I'll go into an example of that in a minute. Part of that, I'm going to jump back to that in a second. The other part of that is testing and scanning for vulnerabilities. That will be part of this assessment, potentially. That if you have software and services within your network that you're sending out to other people, your clients can log in, you have a website maybe on your network, or other ways for people to get into your network. Scanning externally is very important because that tells you of any of those software vulnerabilities that I mentioned before. But it also shows you the automated scheduled vulnerability scans so that you know that you, over time, are continually being protected. The penetration tests tend to be more aggressive, and they really try to, it's essentially a purposeful trying to hack your network. And then that leads into these risk assessments. What type of risk do you have from the services you're offering? What's the possibility of it getting, of someone actually getting into your network? Back to the report that I mentioned, after an assessment, you should get back from whoever is reviewing your security a scorecard that says, great, in these areas that we reviewed, here are the things that you need to remediate, here are things you're doing good, here are things that you aren't doing so well, here are things that are really just missing. And they'll come back with an idea of what it is that you could be doing a lot better and things that you're doing really well on. The second part of that report should be something that says, here's what you have in place, here are things that you really should need to have, and let's talk about how maybe we can help you understand the best way to implement those things over time, because I'm sure most people don't have a big pile of money lying around to do these things immediately, right? So you're going to say, all right, well, let's start implementing these things that'll help me do things better and better. Some of those things that we talked about just that could be looked into are single sign-on, network access controls, intrusion prevention and reporting. All these things are potentially good things to include in your system that may not be needed right now, but there are other things, just general protections, that could be very important. So just as a summary of the recommendations, what I've been describing so far, and this really kind of ends up my overall presentation, is that I want to leave you with the thought that making sure that information security is a priority with your organization from top to bottom, I think, is one of the most critical things you could do to improve your possibility of not getting hacked right now, today. Having some education be put in place, look at ensuring that people understand what information security means and the importance of it, and then helping them communicate back concerns or possible issues that they may see within the organization. Consider a cybersecurity insurance policy. I think that is something that could be very beneficial. It helps protect you, but it also helps you see where they're going to have their exclusions and know what you'll need to do to ensure that you're protected. Talk to one of your IT professionals and ask about a security assessment. They're going to have many different ideas of what you could do to improve your day-to-day operations for your information security. Some things may be very simple and very inexpensive. Other things, probably more so, you'll have to consider how to invest in them. But there are so many little areas of low-hanging fruit that would be very important. I would highly recommend looking into that. And then you're going to have a list that are going to come back from that assessment. These are all the things you can do. Prioritize it. Just go through that and say, these are things I got to do right away. These are things that we'll do over time. And then I would highly recommend having some testing and scanning to be an ongoing part of your business. I know that sounds simple, but it is something that when you have that history and you're testing and scanning, it looks great, and then a big red flag comes up, it's a lot easier to know that that's a problem than when you just start doing it. So really that's the gist and bulk of my presentation. Yes, Trey.
Many, if not all, of these people use a third-party point-of-sale system, micro-markets.
Yes.
Is there anything they're required to do from their end for PCI?
That the operators?
Need to do PCI's concern. Any self-assessments or?
From a PCI standpoint, if credit card data is never transmitted in any way on your network, then you're not. You're not required to adhere to PCI. But if any way, if credit cards are held by somebody or are swiped into your system and then goes into the other point-of-sale system, having a PCI review and a checklist and a check mark to say, yes, we're adhering to the PCI policies, would be highly recommended. That is correct. That PCI is, so when PCI requirements come in and they say, all right, we need to look at your system and how you're handling it, that both the machine that you're running the system off of, that how the credit cards are being handled, all of that falls under the PCI. So in that case, all of them should have a PCI review and should be certified that the way that the systems are set up are in compliance with PCI standards. PCI is, yes, always going to recommend the highest level of oversight as possible, which is good. It also can be a little overwhelming. So I would certainly reach out with a point-of-sale vendor and ensure that they have provided their requirements to maintain PCI compliance. But then also, I would certainly recommend a third-party PCI provider or PCI certification reviewer to at least give you some advice on that. What does it mean? That's a few questions there, Randy, so let me walk through that. PCI is a very strong certification that's required by the credit card industry. And anybody that's processing credit card data must be compliant and certified. The way that they get around some of those rules is that a point-of-sale vendor, let's say, states that at the stopping at that device, at that actual point-of-sale vendor device, that's where PCI ends. But there are stages through that that need to be reviewed and maintained. As we mentioned, the network connectivity is certainly a concern within the PCI regulations, as well as if there are any skimmers, that's certainly something that needs to be reviewed and checked often. So there are fines, heavy fines, if someone is found to be out of compliance. But what I would recommend, and this is what the PCI industry recommends, is that you reach out to your vendor and ask for that documentation on the requirements that they are transferring to you for any of that PCI oversight and compliance, and to make sure that you're protected, that they never come back to you and say, well, that's not our fault, that it was the person who's using our terminals or our systems, that was their fault, and then try to come back on you for any type of fine or whatnot. But PCI as an entity is owned and managed by the credit card industry. They can levy fines. They can confirm or deny compliance. So all of those things are critically important, and it would make a lot of sense to ensure that you have that documentation on hand and that you're familiar with the transfer of responsibility that they've placed on you as a user of their system.
So
there are a ton of them all around the country. I'd be happy to provide you with some ideas. My firm does some of those, and there are others, especially in Richmond or whatever area, that could do them locally. So I'd be happy to provide some resources, recommendations.
Kirby, I have two quick
You do.
questions.
Sure.
Can you confirm if the Russians actually hacked the 2016 election?
I actually was at a presentation a week ago with a gentleman from the FBI there who would not completely 100% attribute the attacks to the Russian hackers on the election. He said in as much as possible that it was 100% attributed without committing to it. So, two different things. The Apple reader is, I'd say, is mostly secure. Anything can be hacked, so let's start with that. The fingerprint reader on your phone is limited to, on the Apple side, it doesn't send that fingerprint data anywhere outside of your phone. So as long as you maintain your phone and you are aware of what's going on with your accounts, you can use your phone to connect to things, but it's very difficult to hack that because it also only will allow you for a certain number of times to try it before it makes you do a secondary form of authentication. I'm not familiar with the other readers that you're talking about, but the best secure way of doing that is to, hopefully, they don't transmit that fingerprint data all over the place and they keep it in a very secure location if they do. But I think it's a very secure way of doing it. No one's going to steal your thumb and use it some other place. Yeah. So that as long as that network is well maintained, I wouldn't be concerned too much about as an individual about the security of your fingerprint. I would like to know that vendor is doing a good job of protecting that data. That sounds reasonable. Is this for a credit card transaction? Did you say?
No, this is just accessing the card.
Just for accessing it. Okay. Then it sounds like a very reasonable, secure system. I'd like to know if some sort of documentation on how that information, that algorithm is stored, how long it's stored, a few other different things about the overall process. But if it's not PCI or HIPAA, there's not any major overarching regulations around that. But it sounds like it's pretty secure. Yeah, most of the vendors I've worked with, like U.S. Navy is a client and the Army, and we've done a number of different processes with multi-factor authentication with them, and including using fingerprint. And the vendors today have become pretty savvy on meeting some pretty minimum level requirements. And NIST is the government organization that oversees security requirements for authentication systems with the U.S. government. And if you can try to get them to conform to the NIST requirement or ask if they get close to that, then that's your best possible scenario, because the government's pretty strict about that kind of thing. That absolutely is happening a lot. PCI really is a foundation of that. The credit card vendors got together and said, we are going to enforce compliance, across the board instead of waiting for the government or some other industry or some other entity to do it. I think having a certification for the entire industry makes a tremendous amount of sense. It's good economies of scale, and it holds those vendors to a certain standard. So I'd highly recommend that if it's not already part of it. But there are other industries that are definitely doing that. Great idea. Any other questions? Well, I hope that you found the presentation valuable. You can get as deep or send any other information that you might like to have. And I'll leave some cards out, or you can certainly contact me through anybody at Lightspeed. And I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. Thank you.